Hello everyone. So we're going to be considering the effects of the thyroid hormones, and we will be considering the physiological elements, and we will be considering the disease states. So there are two hormones which we consider as the major thyroid hormones, T3 and T4. The thyroid gland mostly produces T4. 97% of the product is T4, 93% of the product is T4, and 7% is T3. But the fact is that most of the T4 in the extrathyroidal tissues is converted into T3 by the enzyme deiodinase. And so actually the biologically active form is then T3. Qualitatively they have the same effect, but T3 is 4 times more potent and has a more rapid onset of action. T3 begins its action, or its actions become apparent in 2 to 3 hours of administration, whereas the actions of thyroxine take 2 to 3 days to become apparent. So this is the more biologically active form. The half-life of T3 is just 3 days, whereas that of T4 is 7 days. Right? So this was a basic comparison. Let's talk about the effects, because qualitatively they have the same effects on metabolism. And then we will talk about the states during the various disease disorders. Metabolism, the P for protein. The normal thyroid concentration is enhancing protein anabolism, and that is how it normally is. But in states of hyperthyroidism, this means hypothyroidism, this means hypothyroidism. In states of hyperthyroidism, protein catabolism is promoted by the thyroid hormones, by T3 and T4. And this is why one of the major symptoms or the signs of hyperthyroidism is muscle weakness. Or muscle wasting. In the case of someone who has hypothyroidism, that person has sluggish movements. Alright. Then the effects on carbohydrate metabolism. The thyroid hormone is enhancing almost all aspects of carbohydrate metabolism, probably because the thyroid hormone has a direct effect on the transcription of many genes, and so a lot of protein enzymes, structural proteins, their production is enhanced by the effects of T3 and T4, and this effect appears to have a widespread consequence on a lot of the metabolic processes. So there is enhancement of gluconeogenesis, right? Glucose absorption from the intestine. There's also an enhancement of glycogenolysis, and all of these increase the blood glucose levels. But also the levels of insulin is increased and glycolysis is promoted, and so there is also an increase in the peripheral utilization because of the thyroid. But in hyperthyroid states, there is hyperglycemia, slight hyperglycemia, and in hypothyroid states there is slight hypothyroidism. So I'm hoping. Now what about lipid metabolism? Normally thyroid gland is promoting lipolysis, and because of that it is increasing fatty acid mobilization and fatty acid oxidation, which is why in hyperthyroid states there is weight loss, and in hypothyroid states there is weight gain, and these are the very important symptoms that a person with hyper and hypothyroidism will come to you with. So these are the effects on the major. Now the BMR is also increased, which is why BMR can be an indicator of hyperthyroidism or hypothyroidism. Also the number and the size of the mitochondria is increased. The activity of the sodium potassium ATPase pump is increased, and also there's another effect on uncoupling oxidative phosphorylation. Normally this process is calorigenic and thermogenic. In hyperthyroid states, because of the thermogenic effect becoming enhanced, there will be great sweating, and the person will be heat intolerant. So these are the signs, these are the symptoms. And what is the thing that a clinician might pick up on? The fact that a person with hypothyroidism will have moist, warm palms. That would be because of the sweating, and that would be because of the heat intolerance. Actually, the person will say कि मुझे घबराहट होती है गर्मी में. The sweating is actually more because of the fact that there is vasodilation, and that is actually why the more accurate reason for why the palms are moist and warm. So that was the effect. And let's have another effects. Now, in a person with hyperthyroidism and hypothyroidism, the tender reflexes will be brisk. For example, you might try to elicit the knee jerk, it would be more brisk than usual. But in a person with hypothyroidism, the relaxation phase of a knee jerk would be prolonged, would take a bit more time to return back. So that can be an indicator. Now talking about the effects on the CNS. The effects are more developmental, right? And if there is congenital hypothyroidism of the fetus, of the infant and the young child, there is a disorder known as cretinism, in which there is marked mental retardation. Effects on the CVS. There is upregulation of beta adrenergic receptors normally, right? And because of the vasodilation, because when the metabolic rate is high, there's more O2 consumption and more metabolic products being produced, and that tends to enhance vasodilation, and so the flow is enhanced. Secondarily, the cardiac output is enhanced. This enhances the heart rate. And also the myocardial contractility, this is myocardial contractility, that is also enhanced. So in a person in a hyperthyroidism state, that person will have tachycardia, and my spellings are terrible, which will be, the symptoms would be the person will come with palpitations, and that would be because of the tachycardia. Similarly, there would be bradycardia in the opposite scenario. Effects on the CVS. On the skeletal system, there is generally growth, but also maturation, so epiphysis fusion. GI affects motility and secretion. Diarrhea in a person with hypothyroidism person would come with constipation. Effects on the CNS would increase. There would be in hypothyroidism, there would be excessive excitability, there would be nervousness, paranoia, the kind of psychic disorders, and sluggish. The person would be sluggish mentally in the case of hypothyroidism. So these are the various effects that need to be considered. So now let's talk about hyperthyroidism and hypothyroidism in comparison. My apologies, it's not focusing. And hypothyroidism, we'll start with the causes. Now, what are the causes of hypothyroidism? Hypothyroidism is when there is, what is it? When there is more T3 and when there is more T4. The causes can be primary and secondary. Primary cause can be Graves' disease, and this is an autoimmune situation. In Graves' disease, at some point there was exposure of antigens in the thyroid gland to the ECF, which led to the production of autoantibodies. These autoantibodies are known as TSI, thyroid stimulating immunoglobulin. Right now, normally in autoimmune disorders you would expect a loss of functionality and not overfunctionality, but these are interesting. The name itself is pretty telling. So these are specific to TSH receptors, but except TSH receptor has a stimulatory effect that lasts. TSH has a stimulatory effect that lasts for an hour, but these TSIs have an effect that lasts for up to 12 hours. And because of that, all the activity of the thyroid hormone is increased, and this also leads to the production of a goiter. So this was the mechanism that you as a physiology student should be aware of. So this is the most common cause, this is the most important, and they often ask about this. So the background of this being an autoimmune disorder should be understood. It should be understood how these antibodies were initially produced, because at some point there was some damage that led to exposure of antigens in the thyroid gland to the ECF. Then these TSI were produced. The fact that they exert their effect on the TSH receptors, and the fact that this is responsible for the overactivity as well as the goiter. These are all things that need to be considered. Another important reason can be an adenoma. The thyroid adenoma is a less common cause, but the situation is generally similar, except it does not have an autoimmune background. Alright, other than this, what can cause hypothyroidism? Iodine. If you take too much iodine in the diet, that can lead to hyperthyroidism. If there is intake of too much exogenous thyroid hormone, that is known as thyrotoxicosis, factitia. Right? Thyrotoxicosis adenoma, subacute thyroiditis, in which there is basically inflammation. Now, when there is too much iodine in the diet, it can lead to something known as, it can also lead to hyperthyroidism. So these are the causes that we've considered. Now for the causes of hypothyroidism, there is also an autoimmune disorder which is important, Hashimoto's disease. It is said that initially Hashimoto's disease leads to hyperthyroidism, but later on it is hypothyroidism, in which case the autoimmune disorder leads to destruction of the gland and later fibrosis. There is also iodine deficiency. There can be iatrogenic causes. For example, there was thyroidectomy because of hyperthyroidism, which led to too little thyroid hormones being produced. Or it might be because of radiotherapy, which led to the same outcome. So these are the various causes that can lead to hypothyroidism. These were primary causes because the problem was at the level of the thyroid gland. There are also secondary causes. All of these are primary. Secondary in hyperthyroidism can be because of TSH production suppression. The TSH was not being produced. Over here, a secondary problem can be, my apologies, over here it would not have been suppression but TSH secreting tumor, which would have led to hyperthyroidism. Over here the problem would have been if TSH was not being produced.